this topic and this guest is something that is near and dear to my heart, both because, of course, of the cause of religious liberty, but also because it centers on my home state of Colorado, where I am broadcasting from. You might have heard of the saga of Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cakeshop going back to 2012, when Masterpiece was requested to bake a gay wedding cake. Jack Phillips, the owner, said, "No, I can't do that. It's against my religious beliefs," starting years of litigation of various kinds, including in 2017, the very same day that the United States Supreme Court said, you know what, we're going to take up this Masterpiece Cakeshop case against the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which had found Jack Phillips in violation of the law. The Supreme Court says that we're going to take this case, and then what happens? He's asked to bake a gender transition cake and says, no, I can't do that. That's against my religious beliefs, which then leads to another saga of litigation. So for about 9 years, Jack Phillips has been the subject of litigation, of lawsuits, of so much. And he's the author of a brand new book coming out in just a week entitled The Cost of My Faith: How a Decision in My Cake Shop Took Me to the Supreme Court. And I am so pleased to be joined today by Jack Phillips, and an attorney at the Alliance Defending Freedom, which has been doing yeoman's work from the beginning for Jack Phillips, Ryan Bangert. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. It's an honor to have you both here.
Thank you, Jimmy. Appreciate it.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Thank you both for coming on. So, Jack, I want to start with you first, sir, and with a big picture question, because I've gotten to know you. You and I have had several interviews in the past on the radio. In fact, my radio station, 710 KNUS in Denver, back in 2018, did a live remote in support of your efforts to defend religious liberty for yourself and really for everybody else. Here's a picture of that wonderful day in 2018. It was truly a treat. And so I want to ask you a big picture question that I know the answer to, but I think people really need to hear. When you're looking at running your business and the role that faith plays in your business, as well as your day-to-day life just as an individual and with your family, how does that play out? How is it so important to you that you go about living out your faith? And what is sort of the basic principle that guides you in making decisions with regards to whether or not to do business, a certain kind of business with an individual who may request custom cakes?
Yeah, as a follower of Jesus Christ, that directs every aspect of my life, from the way that I treat my employees, the way that I treat my customers, the cakes that I decide to create. Even in my personal life, the way that I handle my finances, my marriage, raising my kids, it impacts every aspect of my life.
And Jack, to that point, when it comes to every aspect in the business side, a lot of this dealing with this question of religious liberty is, do businesses have the right to exercise their religious faith on a day-to-day basis? How do you look at that from a business standpoint?
I think that any businessman has to stand by the principles that they've adhere to in all aspects of their life, just like I just said. When my wife and I started our cake shop, we sat down and we decided that there were certain cakes that we would create and certain cakes that we couldn't create. And among them would be like cakes that celebrated Halloween, or cakes that denigrated or defamed other people, cakes with alcohol in them, cakes that celebrated marijuana, which way back then wasn't even on the radar. But we had guidelines that we decided that we couldn't step across, and when it came time for these two young men to ask for a cake that celebrated a different view of marriage than my biblical view, we had to decline that cake. But we did tell them, I told them, I'll make you other custom cakes, I'll sell you anything in my shop, you're welcome here, anytime. It's just this cake that I can't create.
Well, and to that point, Jack, and then I'll go to Ryan, I remember interviewing on that day that we did the live remote for 710 KNUS a gay man who said, I've never been turned away. I've been more than welcome to come and do business here, to get delicious cakes, to have custom cakes made. Just there are certain things that I know I can't request of Jack because that would violate his religious beliefs. And I think that's such an important point to hear from someone who's just testifying to your good nature as a human being, as a man of faith, that you're going to treat everybody with respect, serve every customer. It's just certain messages on these custom cakes, as you view yourself an artist, are not
Right.
appropriate to your faith.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if we're talking about the same gay man, but he also, the one that I'm thinking of, testified in our trial just a few weeks ago and said the same things, that he knows he's welcome in our shop and that there are certain cakes that I can't create for anybody. And we, welcome that testimony.
Ryan Bangert, attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom. Let's go back to 2012 on. I mean, this has been a 9-year saga of various points of litigation. Walk us through some of the key steps in the process to get to this point of a trial that happened just last month on a different matter, which was a gay, or rather a gender transition cake.
Thanks, Jimmy. And this case has been a long time in coming, and I think it just points out the fact that Jack has been relentlessly harassed because of his faith and because of the stand that he's taken. Now, this case was not about excluding certain individuals because of who they are. This case has always been about Jack's principled refusal not to speak certain messages with which he disagrees because of his faith. And the government should never be permitted to force citizens like Jack Phillips, like others, to speak certain messages that would violate their conscience and their belief. And like you said, this case has been a long time in coming. The plaintiff in this case, Autumn Scardina, made this request of Jack all the way back when his first case was granted certiorari to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it's been years and years and years, and Jack has had to live with this harassment for a long time, and it's just unconscionable. It really demonstrates the fact that the justice system is being weaponized by folks who want to engage in cancel culture to ruin people with whom they disagree.
I think it's such an important point, and it's so true. You look at the government, though, and how the government has handled these cases. Ryan, for example, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission was found not to have handled things without religious bigotry. In fact, the Supreme Court, in a decision written by Justice Anthony Kennedy, the Obergefell decision writer, he was the author of the decision that said gay marriage must be legal across the country. He said that religious discrimination was part of what the decision-making process was for the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Talk to us about that aspect of how the government has mistreated Jack Phillips, Masterpiece Cakeshop, and religious liberty.
Absolutely. The first time through, when Jack was before the commission, it was apparent, it was on the record, several statements being made that Jack's faith was just a cover for discrimination. And you're right, Justice Kennedy said that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable for our government, for decision makers who have the power to ruin a man's life, to view his beliefs and his faith as simply nothing more than cover for discrimination, when in fact, all that Jack is trying to do is serve all people, regardless of who they are. He simply doesn't want to be forced to speak certain messages that directly conflict with his religious belief and to use his God-given artistic talents in ways that his faith says he can't. And so you're right, Justice Kennedy was completely correct when he said this was discrimination of the worst kind, but it was discrimination against a religious believer.
Jack Phillips, you've been at this for, 9 years now, and
Yep.
I can just imagine the extent of the burden that you have been facing, your family, your business, the people who work for you. Talk to us a little bit about that, the challenge of constantly having to face these legal battles and more, personal insults and attacks, maybe just all the negativity, but also what it has taught you about people of faith coming together, unified to say, we need to support religious liberty as a unified front and come together in defense of our fundamental constitutional right.
Yeah, you're right, Jimmy. It has been a long time. And going back to 2012, when the two men came into my shop within just a couple of weeks, this attorney that's suing me in this go round had already sent me emails calling me a hypocrite and a bigot, and it also contacted the Colorado Civil Rights Commission telling them that if these two men didn't sue me, that Scardina, the attorney that's suing me, would take up that case. And we've had other requests from other cakes from this attorney, including a cake with Satan smoking a marijuana joint. And in a face-to-face meeting with this attorney, I was told that if this case was thrown out, or for any technicality, or if I won this case, that I would get a call the next day with another cake and we'd start all over again. So that's just the situation that we're facing here. And even if all the people in the country come and support us, which we're grateful that they are, our courts need to be clear that no American should be able to be forced to live and work against their conscience, to be forced to say things that go against their conscience, that the government is supposed to defend those rights.
Ryan Bangert, attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom. This sounds like there's a personal vendetta by Autumn Scardina that goes back to 2012 on, and that there's been a persistent attempt to try and get Jack into a position where he could be vulnerable in some sort of legal context and ultimately try and file some kind of lawsuit, as has been the case.
I think that's a good way of looking at it, Jimmy. In fact, Autumn Scardina, the plaintiff in this case, the plaintiff who requested that Jack bake this gender transition cake, told Jack that the purpose of this entire lawsuit was to, quote, correct the errors of Jack's thinking. It was not about discrimination against Autumn Scardina. It was all about Jack and his freedom and stripping that away. And I think that's just that's the worst reason to bring a lawsuit, to undermine someone's freedom to think, to believe, and to create in a way that's consistent with their religious faith. And yet that is exactly why this suit was brought.
Just a few minutes left with our guest, Jack Phillips, owner of Masterpiece Cakeshop in Lakewood, Colorado, and author of the forthcoming book just about to be released, The Cost of My Faith, and Ryan Bangert, attorney at Alliance Defending Freedom, which has been doing yeoman's work on Jack's behalf and the behalf of many others who are defending their religious liberties across the country. Just a couple final questions for you both, gentlemen. Jack, when you talk about your business at Masterpiece Cakeshop and what you do when you're asked to make a custom cake, it truly is, from your vantage point, and I know this from past conversations with you, that you are an artist, and the cakes that you make are absolutely miraculous. They look phenomenal, and it's because you're really pouring a lot of that artistry in there. You are an inspired artist. Talk to us about that and how that fits in with this idea of messages that may go against your beliefs, because to me, that's a fundamental point when you're talking about the idea of making a custom cake and how you then have to be creative and figure out what that message is going to be and how to present it.
Yeah, like you said earlier, way back when we first started to open the cake shop, my wife and I sat down and decided which cakes we would do and which cakes we would not. But also created the logo, the name Masterpiece Cake Shop. Masterpiece says art, Cake Shop says cakes, because I wanted this to be a place where you come in and get a specially custom cake. I would sit down and talk with you and figure out if it's a cake for your mom, say, Jimmy, and she likes, has a certain hobby. So we try and figure out what that would be to make this cake a personal statement of your love for your mom, or whatever it is, a remembrance service for someone who's just passed away. It's not just art, it's also communication. It's a message that I'm trying to create from you to whoever the cake is for. So we love to do that and try and make it personal for you.
Ryan, can you speak to the legal aspect of what Jack just described? And also, to me, it's not like Jack has the only cake shop that anybody can go to for a custom cake too. You do have plenty of other locations in Lakewood or throughout the Denver metro area that you could go to as well. And I think that's a point to make too.
That's right, Jimmy. And in fact, Mike Jones, who Jack mentioned earlier, testified at trial that there were other cake shops.
From the radio.
Same guy. He testified at trial that there were other cake shops in the Denver area where he and others could go to get LGBT themed cakes. It wasn't about access. It was all about, as we said earlier, trying to correct the, quote, errors of Jack's thinking. It was a test case, pure and simple. And that's simply not something that I think the law would support, because Jack has a First Amendment right to engage in speech, to exercise his religion, and to create in a way that's consistent with his beliefs. And the Colorado law here should not and cannot be used as a sword to cancel Jack for those beliefs.
And Ryan, this isn't the only case, of course, around the country that's of a similar nature. So very briefly, and I'll be getting into greater depth on this with Judge Ken Starr in the next segment, talk to us about the big picture of what's happening vis-a-vis religious liberty in our country right now.
Well, Jimmy, I think your show's called Jimmy at the Crossroads, and there are, to a certain extent, we are at a crossroads with religious liberty. There are the laws just like the one in Colorado, the anti-discrimination law, are being amended to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And no one here is arguing that individuals in the LGBT community should be refused service because of who they are, but we are arguing that the government cannot force individuals to speak messages inconsistent with their faith. And we're seeing that with photographers, wedding photographers in places like New York, in Kentucky, where we're currently representing individuals who object to photographing wedding ceremonies that are inconsistent with their religious beliefs. Again, they don't refuse to serve people because of who they are. They simply refuse to speak messages and to communicate in ways that are inconsistent with their beliefs. So this is a problem not just in Colorado, it's a problem all over the country as individuals really try to weaponize the justice system to force cancel culture, to force the issue, really take the offensive against Christians and believers and those people of conscience who simply want to conduct themselves in a manner consistent with their faith.
Jack Phillips, final question for you, sir. What do you want people to take away from your story, especially in the big picture, but even just in terms of what you have faced in your own life and with your business and your family? What do you think people should really take away from this very important saga?
Again, I think every American has the right to live and work freely according to their conscience without fear of punishment from the government. But I also believe that every person should draw a line in the sand like my wife and I did at the beginning and know where that line is and know that I won't go any further. I have to stand by what I believe, and I'm so grateful for ADF to be able to help us through this, because we'd have never been able to do anything without the good help of Alliance Defending Freedom.
And something that I think is worth stressing, the point you raised earlier, Jack, about how you and your wife, when you started Masterpiece Cake Shop, you got together and had a conversation about the kinds of cakes, the standards that you would set. And when you have standards set from the very beginning, that's something that you have to go by throughout the course of your business, and certainly shows, in my standpoint, that from my vantage point, that you were coming at this from a consistent objective of living out your faith in your business. And I think that's something everybody needs to keep in mind. And they should certainly check out your forthcoming book, The Cost of My Faith. Jack Phillips, I will never forget the day of 710 KNUS when we were able to do a live remote in support of you and Alliance Defending Freedom. It was a fundraiser for ADF, especially for your case. It is important work, Ryan, that you are all doing at Alliance Defending Freedom. Thank you both so much for joining us today, for your fights for religious liberty, and Jack, for just continuing to stand by your faith and your principles and what you know is right. I really appreciate that about you, sir.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Once again, Jack Phillips, owner of Masterpiece Cake Shop in Lakewood, Colorado, joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, as well as Ryan Bangert, attorney for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which has been defending Jack throughout these ordeals. And make no mistake, these have been ordeals, and they have been really religious persecution. Because, look, like I said, I've been at Masterpiece Cake Shop. I see how he operates. I've interviewed Jack a number of times, as well as ADF attorneys, especially because he's local here in Colorado, and people have just been paying very close attention to this story since 2012, when he first said it's against my religious beliefs to bake a special custom gay wedding cake. And the reason why I say religious persecution is because you can see how he's been treated, how this process has gone from the Colorado state government and the Civil Rights Commission going after him in a discriminatory way, that Justice Anthony Kennedy, again, the author of the Obergefell decision of the Supreme Court, saying gay marriage must be allowed across the country, he said this was religious discrimination against Jack Phillips and Masterpiece Cakeshop. And then when it comes to Autumn Scardina, it seems pretty clear what's going on here in terms of back in 2012, starting to go after, make phone calls requesting cakes that Scardina, an attorney, knew Jack Phillips wouldn't be willing to make, and yet kept coming back. And then the day that the Supreme Court takes up the case against the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, Scardina files that complaint, or rather calls in and requests a cake that was going to be denied inevitably, a gender transition cake, and then goes ahead and files a lawsuit, and the whole saga continues. It's absurd, and it's happening all across the country in ways that are deeply heart-wrenching and heartbreaking for any American who believes in liberty and the foundational principles of this country. Jack Phillips would serve any customer for any general reason. But if there is a particular cake, custom cake that an individual would like, with a message that goes against his religious beliefs, consistently, Halloween cakes, for example, gay wedding cakes, gender transition cakes, he will say, no, I can't do that. And as we noted before, this gentleman, Mike Jones, who I interviewed on 710 KNUS back in 2018, I guess he testified last month to say, look, I've been served just fine and treated well by Jack, by Masterpiece Cakeshop's crew, by his family. And they've never turned me away, because it's not about the person, it's about the message. And when we return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we're going to talk with Judge Ken Starr, author of the brand new book, Religious Liberty in Crisis.
Talking politics, great for generations. Oh, what a mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.